Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome to another aesthetic imaging video tutorial. In this style of video, we're going to not only be going over individual effects, but we're also going to learn how we can apply that both in the kind of, obvious sense and the more outside of the box way. And we're also going to go over how these effects can integrate with other effects to create some really interesting results. So if you want to learn about these effects and all the different uses of them, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you can get the notifications when all these episodes are coming out. And as usual, you'll be able to download the project files so you can follow along. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can find that. And in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at fast box blur. And the way this is going to start out is we're just going to put on a fast box blur and we're going to go through the different settings, what each of them do. So after we go through the different settings and all that, we're going to get into our first example, which is one of the more outside of the box uses of fast box blur, and that's creating this light panel look. And our second example is going to be this. Now look what happens when I grab this ball and I move it towards the text. This is a pretty cool effect that I actually use quite often. So those are examples, and let's get started. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is we're just going to get rid of those, and we're going to create a new composition. We're going to make this 1920 by 1080, 23.976 frames per second. That doesn't really matter, you can make it whatever you want. And our duration is going to be at, I don't know, we'll do 5 seconds. How about that? And we're going to call this FBB main. Alright, so let's hit OK. So we have our new composition. Now we need just something to demonstrate this. So we're going to create a shape layer. There we go. Random shape. So let's create a new adjustment layer by right-clicking in this empty space here, going to New, Adjustment Layer. On top of our adjustment layer, let's call this Fast Box Blur. So let's add our Fast Box Blur. Type in Fast Box Blur, and that is under Blur and Sharpen, as you would assume. All right, so we have our Fast Box Blur. As you can see, there's really not too much to go over here. We have the blur radius, which determines how much blur there is. Look at that. Look at that. It's doing things. Of course, we have a reset button so that we can just reset it to default. Then we have iterations here. Now, this is kind of like the quality of the fast box blur. If we turn this down to 1, you can see it's looking a little gross. So if we turn this up, the more detailed it gets, or not detailed, but better quality looking it gets. All right, so I usually don't touch this number. So let's set it back to 3. That's the default. And then here we have blur dimensions. So right now it's set to vertical and horizontal, apparently, is the words that I was about to say. It's set to horizontal and vertical. We can set it individually to horizontal, and that'll cause it to blur in a horizontal axis. Now, if we change this to vertical, it's going to go vertical. All right, so behind the scenes, I just dragged this demo clip that you saw at the beginning, and I just dragged it into the comp to demonstrate the next part, which is the repeat edge pixels. So as you can see, our image goes all the way to the edge of the comp. That's nothing new. All right, so let's turn on our fast box blur again. So if you notice, we've got this dark edge. And that is because of the fast box blur and the edge of the actual image. So we can actually fix this just by clicking on repeat edge pixels and turning that on. Boom. So that's what that is for. So now that we've gotten a handle on the different parts of the effect, let's create some cool stuff. All right, so we're going to go over to project window. We're going to create a new composition, and we're going to call this light panel. And same settings as before, that's fine. All right, so now we need our text. So let's create a new text, call this light panel. And we can just align that to the center. And of course you can't see what it did because I had the caps lock on. So for this example, we're using Interstate Condensed Black, and that can actually be found on the Adobe Fonts page. So if you want to follow along, just download it. It's a cool font. I use it a bunch of times. All right, so one thing we can do if we want, we can add a little more boldness to it by clicking on the faux bold, and we'll just leave it at that. We can bring these in closer if we want. Actually, let's get OCD here. Let's real quickly just go through and kind of make all these letters evenly spaced. This is just a basic graphic design thing of just making sure there's enough space. Yeah, anyway, that's not really important to what we're doing. All right, so we have this light panel. So the first thing we're going to do is hit Shift Command C to pre-compose it, and we'll call this text PC for pre-composition, and we'll just hit Enter. So now our text is in a nice little container, safe and sound from all the other effects affecting it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to duplicate this by hitting Command D. Boop, just like that. And we'll call this Panel Matte. There we go. Panel Matte. Nailed it the first try. So on our bottom text here, we're going to add our fast box blur. Again, blur and sharpen fast box blur. Let's add that to our text. All right, so we're going to turn this up. And we're going to turn it up to 10. So if we turn off our panel matte, we can see that our text is blurred. So watch this cool little trick. So under here where it says track matte none, we're going to set this to alpha matte panel matte. And what this is doing is it's taking the alpha from our panel matte, and it's making it so that the blur and the text is only showing up within the alpha of our panel matte. And the result of that, when you add a fast box blur to the bottom one, is you get this nice little soft edge, kind of fading edge look. And it kind of looks a little bit like a light. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into our text PC. I'm going to select our layer, go to character, and I'm going to make this 50% brightness. So we're back in our light panel here. Now we can take this even further. Let's do something else here. Let's turn this back on. Set the track matte to none. Although that doesn't really matter. All right, so let's add Venetian blinds to our panel matte. And that is under Transition Venetian Blinds. Let's add that. And let's set the transition completion to 50%. And our direction, we're going to change that to 90 so that we're going horizontal. We can also kind of make the width a little bit bigger. And we're going to take the feather and we're going to feather out the matte. Let's turn off this guy real quick so we can see what we're doing. All right, so what this is doing is, well, if I turn on this transparency grid, you can see we're kind of creating these strips of the layer where it's less visible than the rest. All right, so we're going to set this to maybe about that. I don't know, we can always come back and adjust it. So let's pre-compose this again. Shift Command C. Let's move all attributes. And we'll just leave it at that. Yeah, we'll be lazy about it. All right, so let's turn on our text and turn off our panel matte comp and set this back to alpha matte. And let's turn off our transparency grid. Now, I think it's a little too much here. Whoops. So we can go back. Actually, let's do this. Let's go back to our light panel comp. Let's click on this window right here. Go to View, New Viewer. So we have a side-by-side here. One of these is going to be locked, so it will always stay right here. So this is our final result here. And if we go into our panel matte comp, we can actually adjust the Venetian blinds while seeing what it's going to look like when it's all said and done. All right, yeah, let's just raise the feather up a little bit. And I know this looks dark and nothing like a light panel, but we're going to add some fanciness to it to make it a little more brighter and light-like. Let's exit out of this one and go back into our main panel. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new solid, and we're going to make this a black solid. And we'll call this BG for background. Now we're going to take this and we're going to move it to the bottom. Now I'm going to show you a cool little trick. Shift Command open bracket will bring whatever layer you have selected all the way to the bottom of your list of layers. Conversely, if you want to move it to the top, Shift Command close bracket, or you could even do Command open and close bracket to move it by one layer each time. There you go. Cool little trick. Oh, yes. Also, another thing that I need to point out before we go any further. If we go into our project window right here, you'll see this little number, 16 BPC, bits per channel. So what we want to do is get this to 32, and we can do that by alt-clicking on it until it gets to 32 bits per channel. It's 8, 16, or 32. Also, you could double-click on it, and it'll bring up this box, and you can select that up here. But, it's much easier just to alt-click on it. 32 bits per channel is good for when you're doing glows and stuff like that. A lot of light effects. It just gives you more depth in the color and brightness and all that stuff. All right, so we have our background. We have our comp set up to 32 bits per channel. So let's create a new adjustment layer. And we'll call this glows. Glows. There we go. So first thing we're going to add actually is a VC color vibrance. That's Video Copilot color vibrance. It's a free effect that I use. Why did my throat make that weird noise? So this is an effect that I use quite often. It's free, and we're just going to add that to it. And this is for just colorizing your image. So we're going to set this to, we'll do blue, like a cyanish blue. And that's pretty much all we're going to do for that right now. So now the real meat and potatoes, we're going to add a glow effect. And that is under Stylize Glow. We're going to add that right on top. All right, so glow threshold, we're going to turn that all the way down to 0. Now it got really, really bright. When I do glows, I do usually 3 passes, 3 instances of the effect. I set the first one for the glow radius to be 20. Now glow intensity, we're going to set that down to 0.05. And and that's it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that and hit Command D to duplicate it. Now for the glow radius, so we set the first one to 20, and the equation is we just multiply that 20, the first number, by 3, so 60. And we're going to leave the other settings as is for now, and we're going to duplicate it one last time. And this time we're going to put in 180. All right, so this is a little much. So let's go into our glow intensity on the first one, set that to 0.02. And for the second one, we're going to put 0.02. And for the third one, we'll just leave as is. So now we see we have this nice little glow. All right, so another cool little trick that we can do, we can add a little bit of flickering. So if we go to our text PC, we can hit T on the keyboard to bring up the opacity, and we can alt-click on the stopwatch to bring up the ability to write an expression. And that expression is going to be wiggle, open parentheses, and we're going to type in 2 numbers. We're going to type in 10, comma, 25. If you have a number pad on your keyboard, you can hit enter there, and that will get out of it. But if you don't, you're going to have to just click outside anywhere. Because if you hit enter on the regular keyboard, it just goes to the next line. We don't want that or need that. So this number here, we're telling it 10 times a second. This effect is going to be picking a number 25 above or below the original number that we have set in here, which is 100. So it can't go to 125% opacity. So it's actually just going from 75 to 100 and anywhere in between. And that's doing that 10 times a second. All right, so let's move on to our second example. So let's go to Project. Let's create a new composition. We can also go to Composition, New Composition right here, or we can hit Command N. So let's create a new composition. We'll call this Blob. And we just hit Enter. Let's go over to here and let's go to our Mask tool and select the Ellipse tool. Now, since there's nothing down here in our composition, no layers, we can just go ahead and create a little circle ball. Now, I want to create another one on a separate layer. If I were to have this layer selected and create a new ball, it would actually add that onto our shape layer that's already there. That's not what I want. So in order to get a separate shape layer, we have to click out of it and then create it. All right, so we have our two shapes here. We can select them individually and move them around and everything is normal. All right, so let's create a new adjustment layer and let's add our fast box blur. As long as we have the layer that we want to add it to selected, we can just double click and there we go. So let's turn this up. Something like 41. Now, this whole thing is actually a concept that hopefully I can describe well enough here. Let's change our colors so we can see what's going on here. We're going to change them to red. All right, so I'm going to turn on toggle transparency grid. Let's think of the blur differently than just blurring an image, because it's also blurring the alpha channel. The alpha channel is, of course, determines where an object or image is visible. So here we have a very clear edge. When we add our fast box blur, you can see that we now have a gradient. So if we want to consider the inside of the ball where it's completely visible at 100, we have a gradient going from 100 to 0. Now, this is an important distinction to make and and something that you kind of need to understand before we move on with this effect. So now, as you see, if we move this closer, we kind of have the mixing of the alpha channels right in between. So it might be 0 to 100, but then if we move it in, it goes maybe like 0 to 50 and then back up to 100. Well, let's get into it and show you why I'm trying to explain this concept to you. All right. So on top of our fast box blur here, we're going to add a levels, and that's under color correction levels. So we can double click on that and that'll add it to our comp. All right, let's turn off transparency grid again. Where it says channel, we're going to switch this over to alpha. So here we have the alpha channel and its gradient from 100% visible to not. So what we can do is take this triangle here, let's move it towards the center. Now, if we take this side, we can crunch down the outermost part of it. And if we put it right next to the other triangle that we moved, you'll see that we now have our round shapes again. So if we take our little shape here and we start to move it closer, let's do this. Shift Command H, that'll hide our little doohickeys and overlays and stuff. So as we move this closer, it's going to start, yeah. So this kind of liquidy effect of the two shapes kind of coming in together on each other is because of that mixture of the alpha channels that I mentioned. You know, as they mix together, you can see how this kind of creates the shape that we're looking at here. What the levels is doing is just crunching that. So it gives the appearance of kind of goopy, liquidy, viscous look. So I use this in a lot of different instances. We used it very recently in the disappearing ink effect. So if you want to go check that out, you can do that. That'll be fun. All right, and I'm going to say that's it for this episode so far. You know, in the future, there probably will be many uses of fast box blur. We'll see if I can get another whole episode out of it. But next week, we're going to be doing the many uses of the curves effect. And let me tell you, that effect has a lot of different uses. In fact, so many that I'm pretty sure it's going to have to be 2 videos. So if you want to see more of these videos where we go into detail about the effect and the different uses of it and its different applications and integrations with other effects, just hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, hit like, make a comment, do the thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.